Hello, everyone. This is Sasha with the LTRC. Thank you for joining us for using technology to increase your team's productivity with our sponsor, CosmoLex, as part of the LTRC Industry Insight Series held every Wednesday. Our speaker today is Erica Bursler. Erica Bursler is the Vice President of CosmoLex, developers of the only fully integrated case management, billing, and complete accounting system specifically designed for law offices. Erica's degree is in business administration, and she has nearly a decade of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. Erica is passionate about helping legal professionals improve the way their law firm runs, and she has given numerous presentations across North America on legal technologies such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance to spread her knowledge. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Great, thank you so much, Sasha. Thank you everyone for attending the session today. What we will be talking about, as mentioned in the beginning, is technology and productivity. So we'll start first out by understanding what productivity is and why is now a prime time to actually start focusing on it. Then we'll look at some tips, 5 tips specifically as to how to increase your staff productivity, and then we'll bring in the technology point. A lot of the tips that we talk about center around implementing new tools or even new processes to really take your team's effectiveness and productivity to the next level. And you may or may not have awareness of how productive your team is being currently. And I think, if anything, this may bring up a conversation with your staff. I think having that visibility, that awareness, that understanding of the day-to-day tasks of your team, whether it's one additional person or 100 additional people, I think it's a good conversation to be had. So productivity, let's start there. I think we all want to be more productive. You know, that's definitely a buzzword. It's something that we all want to achieve, but what exactly does that mean? In general, the general definition is how efficiently your resources, that of course includes yourself, are being used to generate a specific output. For a law firm, that often means how many billable hours or just how much effort is going into collecting a particular fee. Now that's everything from the actual legal activities themselves, administrative tasks, billing, even the follow-up for payment. Everything up until you collecting that money is effort going into generating that fee. What all goes into that? What type of activity? What is the return? And how efficient are those tasks being done? That is the key point, is the efficiency. It's one thing to do a task, it's another thing to know how well a task is being done. Now, there are new challenges to keep in mind in the current way of doing things. I know traditionally we're used to seeing when someone is busy or productive. You're used to being in a bustling office. Some of you may currently be in an office where phones are ringing, people are in meetings, emails are being sent. You get that sense of productivity just by being in that environment. And I think with many of us working remotely, especially the last several months, even if it was just for a small part of that, ensuring your staff, but also yourself, are being productive can be a lot more challenging. There's a lot of distractions, especially if some of your staff or yourself are working from home, but also there can be a disconnect with the other people that you're working with. So that will be part of the item that we do talk about. I do think that even if your staff is back in the office, likely this year has brought to light some of the challenges of having staff that may be spread out in different locations that you may have never experienced before. And you always want to be aware of just overall productivity, how those tasks are being done, but to stay away from micromanaging. That's not what I'm suggesting here. And a lot of the tips that we provide you today are how to really gauge and improve that productivity without physically being on top of somebody to see what exactly that they're doing. And also keep in mind that busy doesn't always mean productive. I'm sure we can all relate to days where we're running ragged, super busy, nonstop from AM to PM, but it might not feel like a productive day. We don't feel like we actually accomplished anything. And that's because we likely were maybe not efficient with the work that we were doing or the planning or prioritization of what had to get done. So, like I said, these tips will actually point out to you probably the right direction of assessing that productivity, but also how to increase it overall for yourself and your team. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into these 5 tips. The first one that we're going to talk about is make accountability clear. So what we mean by accountability is the actual definition is basically willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. So basically taking ownership of job responsibilities, not just doing them, but actually taking ownership of what I'm responsible to be doing and whatever result may come of that. And it might seem pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how many people either don't understand accountability or the expectations of them are not clear. Or you're on 2 different pages. You know, one person might think this is what's expected of me, and it's actually the exact opposite or maybe a lot more broader than what they think. So like I said, it's not about who does what. Of course, job responsibilities is a big part of it, but what that result or deliverable will be, and what happens if that deliverable doesn't happen, or if it doesn't happen to the standard that your firm requires. What are the consequences or the follow-up or the learning tools put in place for that? Accountability in general is a management tool. As a manager, I use it all the time. I think often we forget that law firm is a business like any other. So even if you have just one other staff member, you're a manager of that person. And these just general management tools are still very important, and they become even more important if your staff is not in the same location as you may be. All right, so what are some ways to make accountability clear? And a lot of these will center around technology, as we mentioned before. First is to track tasks electronically. I know everybody really loves paper to-do lists. I still do it myself. I love paper. I'm probably a little bit more traditional in that sense. But when I use that for my personal tracking, you know, my personal to-do lists. But when myself and CosmoLex as a company switched years back to electronic task tracking, it really made everybody's job a lot easier for a few reasons. One, there's visibility by everybody. So there's no question as to who's doing what, is that complete, when is this due? Because there's a lot of crossover between different people and different jobs and roles. So if I can see a task and know who has it and where they're at, that helps. I'm not asking unnecessary questions in that case. Also, many task management type of tools have the ability to comment and collaborate with those people. So you might have a task that needs to be worked on by more than one person, maybe a team of people, a couple of people, or there's somebody else who's responsible for holding somebody accountable for something being done. Well, they can comment back and forth, they can create subtasks, they can have a conversation around that item, and it keeps everything linked to that item. So in the future, if you ever had to look back as to what took place, that whole paper trail is there to know what exactly happened and what was the communication around it. And also, which I think is one of the best parts, is the creator can be notified. It could be usually an email notification where you can submit a task to somebody, say it's due, let's say September 15th. And when that person completes it, I can get an email. So instead of me constantly following up with that person and asking if it's complete, I could just be notified and go about maybe reviewing that task or going about my day. There's a lot of practice management tools that do have task tracking built in. There's also a lot of tools like Asana, Teamwork, even just Google Tasks or Outlook Tasks. Again, you want to make it as collaborative as possible. There are a lot of tasks within like calendars that are very independent of everybody else. So each person has their own task list. I recommend using those that make it a bit more collaborative so that everybody has the visibility, everybody can get notifications, see progress, and that really helps a lot with getting those tasks done. Checklist templates. So very often with any business, there are certain things that are quite repetitive. Maybe every time you receive a new client or you receive a client for a certain type of matter, there might be 10, 20, 30 things that have to get done at the very start or across the entire case, or maybe deadlines. Creating task templates or a checklist template is a way to not only save time, so you're not creating those 20 or 30 tasks at once, but it ensures that those items are not being forgotten and also increases that accountability. Because if I have 30 tasks, they all are assigned to their typical people, and I launch that task list on a file, those 30 items will definitely be there. They'll be assigned to those people, and nobody can say, I didn't know I had to do that. So it helps in many different ways. Always assign a due date and priority. This is something we actually emphasize here at CosmoLex internally. Even if you have something that's not urgent, assign a due date, because if you don't, it will get lost in the shuffle, it will get forgotten. And even if it's a month or 2 months out, and then you need to update it, that's okay. But you want to make sure you have a date so that it's at least in the list of priorities. The priority piece is if something needs to be done urgently, or if something's a little bit more minor that can be put off, say it's that way. Because if I have 20 tasks to complete today, I definitely want to go to the urgent ones beforehand. What's urgent to me versus what's urgent to my boss or my colleague might be very different. So the person creating that task should always provide that information. Check-ins. So you don't want to check in every 5 seconds. Like I said, we want to move away from micromanagement, but I think just being able to see that visibility of those tasks is a way to virtually check in. There's also some tools that allow the assignee to assign a progress to their task, like I'm 10% done, I'm 50% done. That helps just from a communication perspective. And lastly is hold accountable for missed items. Accountability means nothing if it's not held to a particular person. What happens if a task doesn't happen, if it's delayed, if it's late? What are the consequences to that, and is that being followed through? And only you can determine what you will and will not tolerate when it comes to productivity or the lack of productivity in your team. Again, it's a management tool. You want to make sure that your staff is working to the standard that the firm has set for itself. Our second item is around communication. So basically, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I have noticed that when you have people in different locations, and this happened to me at the very start, working from home, it tends to be radio silence. Not externally, you're speaking with clients and other people, but internally, that communication is a little bit strained or a little bit different. I think that when you're in the office, it's very common to walk up to somebody's desk, check on a task, discuss an update. And not only is that more challenging, but think about, even if you are in the office right now, even if your whole staff is in the office, interrupting somebody throughout the day is a hindrance on their own productivity. So you want to try to limit that as much as possible. So how do we enhance communication in a way that is more streamlined and, of course, as you guessed, more productive? So some tips around communication. Like I said, I feel often if you're not in the same room, you or your staff may feel they lose the ability to collaborate or communicate effectively with their team. And that's not the case. It just looks a little bit different if you're not all in the same location. So whether same location or not, leverage internal chat tools. Chat tools can help with communicating, whether remotely or in office. Us at CosmoLex, we use a tool called Slack that is internal instant messaging type of tool. And even before the pandemic, we used it all the time. It is my favorite way to communicate because if I have a quick question, I can send it to somebody. I'm not interrupting them. They could be on a phone call, they could be in a meeting, and they'll get back to me whenever they get a chance. Or if it's urgent, it's a way for me to send something to them while they're in a meeting or on a call, and they can get back to me quickly. I get my urgent response, but I'm not interrupting whatever they may be doing to the extent of knocking on their door and interrupting their meeting. So definitely encourage the use of chat tools. Stay consistent with scheduled meetings. One thing we probably all learned about the craziness that's happened this year with, I'm sure many of you have worked from home at some point, you may be transitioning back, is routine. You want to try to keep as much routine as possible. That's what keeps that sense of somewhat normalcy with you and the rest of your staff. And this, of course, goes for personal as well as professional. But keep to those consistent meetings that you normally have to also encourage those check-ins. I noticed that when we started working from home, I would almost only communicate when those meetings happened. in between, it's just different when you're all working in different places. But those meetings allowed us to really catch up and ensure that we're doing that communication that we really need to. Now, while working remotely, you may actually discover which meetings are actually necessary, because meetings is something that can be incredibly non-productive. If you have a 1-hour meeting and it could have been reduced to 30 minutes, 20 minutes, or maybe even just an email, those are the things that you should think about. I'm not saying meetings are not important, but not a meeting for everything. They can be a big time sucker if not used the most effective way. I do suggest having an agenda for every meeting. We also have a rule in CosmoLex that, hey, if you're not getting any value from this meeting, if you can't contribute to this meeting, don't come, or talk about it and let us know why this meeting is not important, and let's revise from there, because we really try to only have internal meetings when it makes sense. Encourage video conferencing. I know all of us have used tools like Zoom I've attended a few virtual conferences, also when working with clients, but internally, I think we forget about it with internal conversations. It is really important. If you're not in person, video is the next best thing. You're able to read body language, everybody stays more attentive, they stay more engaged. And even if you have some people in the office and some people not, encourage video calls. It is something that everybody should be on board with. I mean, we've all been doing it for the last 6 months, but definitely if you see, because I do think in the next year, we're gonna have a lot more people that have kind of personal situations with school and childcare that they may need to have a few days here and there work from home. Well, they should be, if they're working from home, they should be willing to do a video call. And I actually require it for my team. They're not thrilled about it, but I think it makes a huge, huge difference with the type of communication and conversation we're able to have. Our third item is around developing and tracking metrics. So one of the questions as we're talking is probably, how do I know if my team is being productive, especially if you're not seeing them day to day? And often when you're like, how do I know X when it comes to a business, it comes down to metrics, which are basically data points, which you can track progress and analyze them to decide, okay, where do we go from here? Is this good? Is this bad? Does it need improvement? It all comes down to data. I'm a strong proponent of looking at numbers and results as opposed to just how you feel. You may feel your team's being productive, but if you actually look at the output, it may tell a very different story, a more accurate story. So when it comes to metrics, you might be thinking, okay, well, where do I start with that? You may or may not be using measurements or KPIs, which is key performance indicators. You may or may not be using them right now. They're a very, very common business tool. So the first few steps, of course, the first step is figuring out, well, what metrics do I even need in my firm? To do that, you think of, well, what business answers are you seeking? One may be the productivity of your staff. Likely there are many other questions. So think of, if somebody were to ask you a question like, what's your most profitable area of law? What was your increase in income over the previous month? How many of your costs actually get reimbursed? All these questions, do you know the answers? Are they important to you? And then you want to figure out, okay, I don't know the answers, but I want those answers. So what data do I need to answer those questions? Very often that information does fall into a financial category, usually billing related, accounting related, somewhere in there, because very often metrics do have to do with money, but not always. So what information do you need? Likely it's already in some sort of software that you're using right now. That takes you to the tools. Like I said, usually the billing and accounting tools that you're using contain most of this information already. It knows the hours that you're tracking, the bills that you've sent out, the money that you've received, the income that you've made. It's all there. You just have to make sense of it. And that comes down to more of the analysis side of it. So where is your business now? Coming up with a benchmark. So knowing that, I'll use a simple example of income. If I want my family law practice or part of my practice to be 50% of my overall income for the firm, and right now it's at 25%, Well, I know I'm at 25, I want to be at 50, and then I need to determine how to get there. So the benchmark is figuring out where you're at right now and where you would like to be. And then it's deciding, well, what are the individual and company goals based on that? So it's not just company, especially when you're talking about productivity. You want to think of the individual themselves, what they do, what their role is, what's important in their role. It could be how many hours they're tracking, or maybe they're not tracking their hours properly and they're missing out on a lot of that. Well, how is John versus Jane versus Sarah versus somebody else? That would be more of an individual goal. And then keep an eye on the health of these goals over time. So you realize you're building a structure. What's important to you? Of those, where are you at right now? Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? And let's check on it maybe quarterly. Quarterly is a very common time to check in on those items, but also annually. You want to look back and see trends over time. Now here's examples of some law firm metrics. Some may have a direct link to your productivity for your firm. To be honest, every activity you do links to productivity. And as we said earlier, productivity is all about the output and what you get back from that. So obviously it links to profitability as well. Some of these are more of a deeper financial analysis. So you could see things like business development effort and cost analysis, which is how much effort am I putting into my marketing versus how much I'm getting back from that. Tracking profitability by segments. Fixed fee profitability of the effort I'm putting in on fixed fee files. Is my fee appropriate based on that? So here's some examples. Feel free to jot those down and then think of what makes the most sense for your firm. And you might even have more than just what's on this list as to the questions that you don't have answers to that you are seeking. Our fourth item is seek to reduce inefficiencies. So of course, at the very beginning, I said productivity has a very tight link with efficiency, and efficiency is all about are you making the best use of somebody's time completing a certain task? Is it done the most efficient way possible? If you're not looking at how a task is done, you just say, oh no, that's completed, that's completed, that's completed, but you don't know how well it's being completed, then you don't know if it's efficient or not. So it can be actually a lot of time being sucked by these inefficient processes, and you might not be aware of it if you're not kind of digging into what the steps are in completing these various tasks. So let's talk about how to reduce the overall inefficiencies. First is leverage metrics. The metrics that I showed previously, they should point out time suckers. So I mentioned that fixed fee profitability ratio. If you're spending, let's say, $5,000 worth of time on a file that you're charging $3,000 for, well, either you need to raise your fee or there's a lot of inefficiency happening there that can be really pulled back to kind of meet that fee more accurately. Seek the feedback from your staff. Often the business owner or partners are not the one that are getting their hands dirty in every little task. I hear all the time from paralegals. They're the ones who use, for instance, CosmoLex. They use CosmoLex the most, but they don't have necessarily the decision-making power as to how processes can or cannot be done. So have that conversation, have that kind of that open door policy in terms of saying, maybe sit down once a year or once a quarter and say, hey, what are your tasks that you do? How well are they going? What do you struggle with? What are your challenges? And they may say, you know what, there's this one thing that I do manual and it takes up so much of my time. And if there was an easier way to do it, it'd be so much better. Well, maybe you didn't know that piece of information. And now that you do, we can think about, well, are there things that we could do differently to cut this person's time from 5 hours on a task to maybe a few minutes or under an hour? That's a big time saver there. Look for tools to automate repetitive tasks. So if you're noticing inefficiencies through feedback or through just the things that you're doing, likely there's a tool that can make it quicker. That's what technology is for. A big pull for technology is just increasing efficiency overall. And I'll talk about in a moment what the type of things that you could look for to increase efficiency and what are the biggest time suckers are in a firm. But you first need to know what's inefficient to know what tools and functions to look for. And then I think that some support staff, they really worry when they hear the term increase efficiency because they think that it's going to put them out of a job. And I think the mindset really needs to change around that. It's not about I'm replacing you with technology, because that's not the case. It is, I want to elevate you to do more billable work, more added value, and these more tedious, mundane, repetitive tasks can be left to technology. And you can manage that technology, of course, but why waste hours doing, getting invoices out when it can be a lot more simplified? So think of how those resources can be better utilized. And maybe even in your hiring, when you're thinking of who to bring onto your team or how to expand, you want to look for those higher value candidates. So less of the mundane work and maybe more towards that billable work, which of course will bring in more income for the firm. Some examples of using technology to automate. Batch billing is a very simple one. If you have 200 invoices that go out each and every month, and you're doing any of that part manual, meaning one at a time, or editing and customizing each in Word and sending them out individually, that is a huge inefficiency in your firm. I think very often bills get out delayed due to an inefficient billing process. So batch billing tools can do predefined checklists and workflows that we mentioned earlier. Practice management tools and task management tools have those functions. Document assembly. So if you draft documents individually each and every time, look for, they're called like document merging tools. So things like Hot Docs is like that. Even mail merge in Outlook, or I should say Word mail merge. Practice management tools also have those functions. Integrations that can combine your various tools to reduce double data entry. That's another big time sucker. If they're having to take one point of data and enter in 3 different places, it's not just the entry, it's the keeping that information up to date and ensuring it's accurate. You're looking at 3 different places all the time. If there's a way to reduce that with whether it's a sync, integration, or everything kind of being under one roof, the better off that you are. And then import high volume. So if you have a lot of costs, a lot of time, a lot of whatever items, high volume items, I know like printing, people want to import their printing costs. Some tools have the ability to import those functions. Bank transactions, you can even import them from the bank to say, hey, what are my credit card expenses this month? Or can you let me know what is cleared in my bank this month? Anything that's high volume, see if there's a way to import or cut down the individual manual work on those. And the last item we'll talk about, which actually needs a lot less explanation now than it used to, is to utilize cloud tools. I think during this pandemic, we're all had to kind of, dive in the pool with cloud technology. It was a necessity, like Zoom, which we're using right now. That's a cloud program. And without tools like this, businesses would not have been able to operate at all during this year. So I think that's very important. You all have likely been exposed to it, but there's also benefits like working from anywhere on any device, Mac, PC, tablet, phone. You don't have to worry about IT maintenance. That gets taken care of for you off-site by the vendor, whoever hosts that program. You get automated updates. Likely everybody's on the latest and greatest version, which also comes with integrations, syncs. A lot of cloud applications have a wide variety of other cloud applications that they integrate with. And modern functionality, new ways of doing things. I think efficiency or increasing efficiency very often comes down to leveraging modern tools. So I hope that by going through today's session, you've been able to think about your current setup, how things are going, or at least open that conversation and find out how to do things a little bit better. So that wraps up our topic. Of course, if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about CosmoLex, I welcome it. Feel free to reach out to us, or you can, of course, visit cosmolex.com for more information.